The Silk Road. The name conjures images of camel caravans crossing endless deserts, of exotic goods from distant lands, of Marco Polo at the court of Kublai Khan. But behind the romance lies something far more interesting: the world's first global supply chain, a network that connected four empires, spanned 7,000 miles, and operated for over 15 centuries. This is the story of how the Silk Road actually worked: the taxes, the tariffs, the middlemen, and the empires that grew rich by simply being in the way. And it is a story with lessons that resonate today in our own era of global supply chains and trade wars. The Silk Road was not invented. It was assembled from pre-existing trade corridors built by the empires that came before. Around 515 BC, the Persian king Darius I completed the Royal Road, 2,700 kilometers from Susa to Sardis, with 111 relay stations. The Greek historian Herodotus wrote that royal couriers could cover the entire distance in 9 days. "Nothing mortal travels faster than these Persian couriers," he said. The road was 6.25 meters wide on paved sections, wide enough for chariots and military columns. This road system became the western backbone of what would later be called the Silk Road, and it was already 300 years old by the time the first Chinese envoy reached Central Asia. The true birth of the Silk Road came in 138 BC. The Han Emperor Wu of China dispatched an envoy named Zhang Qian with 100 men to seek allies against the Xiongou nomads. Zhang Qian was captured, held hostage for 13 years, married a Xiongou wife, and fathered a son. When he finally escaped and reached Bactria, he made a stunning discovery: Chinese silk was already being sold in local markets. The trade route existed, but no one in China had known about it. When Zhang Qian returned in 126 BC with only 2 survivors from his original party, the Han court made a strategic decision. They would officially open and protect these trade routes. The Silk Road was born. And it is worth noting that Zhang Qian's journey happened 1,400 years before Marco Polo's. Here is the key to understanding the Silk Road: no single merchant ever traveled end to end. Goods changed hands 10 to 20 times between Chang'an and Rome. Each transaction added a markup of 10 to 50%. A Bactrian camel carried about 200 to 300 pounds. The entire cargo of a 500 camel caravan equaled less than 1 shipload of an Egyptian grain ship. This was a high-value, low-volume trade. And the markups were staggering. A pound of silk costing 1 to 3 ounces of silver in Chang'an sold for 100 to 300 ounces of silver in Rome. A markup ratio of 100 to 1, sometimes 300 to 1. To put that in modern terms, a product that cost $30 at the factory would sell for up to $9,000 at retail. The empires in between collected their share. Parthia, which controlled the only viable overland route between Rome and China, charged a 25% ad valorem tax on all goods passing through its territory. This was called the Tatart. It was the Parthian Empire's single largest source of revenue. The Sogdian city-states, Samarkand, Bukhara, Panjikent, charged 3 to 5% per city for safe passage. With 10 or more city-states along the route, cumulative Sogdian fees reached 30 to 50% of the goods' value. And when the goods finally reached Rome, the imperial treasury charged another 25% at the Red Sea ports. The cumulative tax burden on a single pound of silk, over 58% of its final price, went to taxes and tariffs across 4 empires. The merchants themselves added another 100 to 300% in relay margins. The result: 1 ounce of silver at the source became 20 to 30 ounces of gold at the destination. The true architects of the Silk Road were the Sogdians, an Iranian people from what is now Uzbekistan and Tajikistan. They were never politically unified. Instead, they operated through independent city-states: Samarkand, Bukhara, Panjikent. Their language became the lingua franca of the Silk Road. The Sogdian merchant could travel from China to Constantinople speaking only Sogdian the entire way. They established merchant colonies in every major Silk Road city. In 1907, the archaeologist Aurel Stein discovered 5 letters from Sogdian merchants near Dunhuang, written around 313 AD. These are the most important economic documents from the Silk Road. One letter, from a merchant named Nane Vandak, describes the sack of Luoyang and the collapse of the silk market. It is a first-hand account of a supply chain crisis from 1700 years ago. The Sogdians also spread Buddhism, Manichaeism, and Nestorian Christianity along their trade routes, making them not just merchants but cultural intermediaries who shaped the religious map of Asia. For 600 years, the Byzantine Empire maintained the most successful state monopoly in history. In 540 AD, Persian intermediaries controlled the silk trade, and prices reached 15 gold solidi per pound, the equivalent of several thousand modern dollars. Emperor Justinian was desperate. His solution was an act of industrial espionage. Two Nestorian monks, at Justinian's urging, traveled to Central Asia. They concealed silkworm eggs inside hollow bamboo canes and smuggled them back to Constantinople. The journey took approximately 2 years. This single act of smuggling broke the Chinese and Persian stranglehold on silk production. Justinian established state silk factories in Constantinople, Antioch, Tyre, Beirut, Thebes, and Corinth. The Byzantine silk monopoly lasted for 650 years until the Fourth Crusade in 1204. Imperial purple silk was reserved for the imperial family by sumptuary law, and silk became the foundation of Byzantine diplomacy, used as political currency, tribute, and elite gift-giving across Europe and the Middle East. The Silk Road reached its absolute peak under the Mongols. For about 100 years, from 1250 to 1350, a single government controlled the entire route from China to Persia to the Black Sea. This was the Pax Mongolica. Trade volume increased by an estimated 10 times. A traveler could cross from Crimea to Beijing with a single passport called a paisa. Marco Polo traveled the full route under Kublai Khan and documented Chinese paper money, which he described as a piece of paper worth a great deal. He documented coal, the imperial postal system with 10,000 stations, and urban wealth that seemed impossible to Europeans. He reported that the Yangzhou customs alone collected about 4 million gold pieces annually. A Florentine banker named Francesco Pegolotti even published a practical travel guide to the Silk Road in 1340, listing costs, exchange rates, and travel times. The route was so safe and standardized under the Mongols that a banker could publish a guidebook. But the Silk Road's greatest success carried the seed of its destruction. The Black Death almost certainly traveled the Silk Road from Central Asia to Crimea and then to Europe. The Mongol siege of Kaffa in 1346 saw plague-ridden corpses catapulted over the walls, the first recorded instance of biological warfare. From Kaffa, Genoese ships carried the plague to Constantinople, Venice, Genoa, and then all of Europe. The Silk Road's single greatest contribution to world history may have been the transmission of a disease that killed 30 to 60% of Europe's population and permanently altered the continent's economic and social structure. The very infrastructure that had enabled unprecedented trade and cultural exchange also enabled a pandemic that reshaped the world. The Silk Road died not from a single cause, but from two: the collapse of unified political control and the rise of a cheaper alternative. When the Mongol Empire fragmented in 1368, safe passage collapsed. China under the Ming dynasty became isolationist. Tamerlane briefly reunified the western route, but his empire fragmented after his death. The Ottoman conquest of Constantinople in 1453 gave the Ottomans control of the Bosporus, and European merchants were squeezed by Ottoman tariffs. Then came the Age of Discovery. In 1498, Vasco da Gama reached India by sea. A single ship from Lisbon to Calicut carried more cargo than 10,000 camels. The overland Silk Road became economically irrelevant within a single generation. The irony is perfect. The Silk Road's greatest success, Pax Mongolica, directly enabled the Black Death, which devastated the populations that made the road profitable. And the road's greatest failure, political fragmentation, drove Europeans to find a sea route, which made the road permanently obsolete. So who really won from the Silk Road? Not the Romans, who suffered a permanent trade deficit that Pliny the Elder estimated at 100 million sesterces annually, 5 to 10% of the entire imperial budget flowing permanently eastward. Not the Chinese, who saw the road as a diplomatic tool rather than an economic engine. The middlemen won. Parthia and Sasanian Persia collected enormous tariff revenue for simply being in the way. The Sogdian city-states made their entire livelihood from transit trade. The Mongols won most of all, taxing everything moving along the route under unified rule, and then the sea route makers won forever. The Portuguese, Spanish, and Dutch broke the middleman stranglehold by bypassing the entire overland route. The Silk Road was not a road. It was a network of shifting routes across deserts, mountains, and steppes. It was the world's first global supply chain, and its lesson is as relevant today as it was 2,000 years ago. Whoever controls the route controls the wealth.